Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Terminator, the Sarah Connor Chronicles, Season 2, Episodes 1 and 2. So, I covered the whole first season of this, and you can go ahead and check that out, check that review. More than likely, I'm going to put a playlist together of all of Season 1 and now whatever is to be coming out of Season 2 for this show. So, go ahead and check all the content out. Without a doubt, I'm coming back to this show for whatever reason. Really did enjoy the first season. I was like, you know what? There might be something here to be really interesting to go into the second season, just talk about it and talk about the first two episodes. So really, I thought this show was really interesting. I really enjoyed it, and like going into season two. We really just have episodes that are to be kind of having this like one focused thing upon, where like this first episode back is to really just focus that Cameron is to seemingly be malfunctioning, and it seems that she is to instead of being the savior of John Connor and Sarah Connor, it seems that she is to malfunction and then want to kill them again, or want to seemingly kill them for the first time in the show. And like the first episode is really just uh, trying to fix that malfunction, trying to fix that problem. And then the second episode is to have them kind of deal with this character named Greenway, who is eventually putting a stop to their both Sarah and John's possible future hideaway or hideout. Because it seems in the future they are to have this main main base that is to be this power plant, which they end up finding in the second episode. So it seems like we have a lot more side stories going on in this season compared to the first. Like I remember how it seemed that there was like every single episode was just about John Connor and Cameron, and we'd have a lot of focus on those characters, and then eventually like we'd fill in the gaps with other characters. Now it seems like there's like a whole lot of side stories going on. We even have a side story going on with James Ellison and Charlie Dixon. And we also have that, but then we also have seemingly our main villain of this season, who is be Catherine Weaver, which I don't know if I like, because I'm just like trying to remember some of this stuff from the first season. I'm like, okay, I think the first season didn't have much of a villain, but I guess this season they decided to up the ante to eventually have us have some villain that we end up finding, whether she's human, whether she's robot, either way, she's a very menacing character. So yeah, so I think that's all I want to say about these first two episodes. And so eventually we'll kind of play out what all happens with these first two episodes. Um, I would still say that considering not much of a real legitimate memory of the first season, going back into this kind of is just a little bit of a jarring kind of thing. But when really looking at it, like I could get little like fabrications in my mind about what had happened in the first season. So just kind of coming back to this is just kind of like it's weird, but like it's another show. Like it's another season. Like eventually things will come back to me. So with that said, let's go back into these episodes. Let's go into that double five time territory. Let's just go into spoilers about this one. Let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this show. Well, in the first episode, we have John Connor, who ends up giving us a haircut in this episode. So eventually, we have at the tail end of this first episode, John Connor decides to cut his hair for whatever reason, and so that's kind of where we leave off with this episode with John Connor and his shorter hair. So in the very beginning of this episode, we have this weird musical intro going in, which I was like, this is so weird. Like, we have this long stretch of a music intro with, I guess, them not being able to have much of dialogue going on here. It's all just silent stuff, and even if there is dialogue, we can't hear it because music. So Sarah and John Connor are in their hideout, their hideaway, and all of a sudden these two men come in, whether they're human or whether they're Terminators. I don't know, because it's not actually said who they actually are in this episode. I would have to just take the hint that these characters would possibly have to be Terminators, I guess. But your guess is as good as mine. So it seems we have Cameron, who is to come seemingly from an explosion, and this car explosion, and she ends up taking this like metal piece from the back of her neck or back of her head and just kind of pulls it out and chucks it out. So Cameron comes in and is to take out these two men, and then is eventually coming after both Sarah and John. And like, we now have these characters running, realizing that Cameron has malfunctioned, because Cameron is to basically tell them uh, that she is malfunctioning, or that she isn't acting quite as what she was to have normally acted. So both Sarah and John are to run off to eventually get into a car accident, which leads them to now have to go and rush into this church to just kind of have this hideaway, where eventually this father Armando Banala is to ask them, like, hey, like, it looks like you guys were in a car accident, like, do you guys need any help, like, what can I do for you? And so Sarah's asked this guy for salvation, and he's like, or some place to hide, and he's like, okay, I can easily do that. So eventually what happens is Cameron starts to go looking for them, and Connor is to eventually say that Cameron is to easily figure out uh, where eventually John and Sarah are actually going to go, because Cameron knows everything. She knows who they're going to be, where they're going to be, when they're going to be at these places, because they had gone on the plans of telling her everything, of getting fake IDs. So, and I thought that was kind of interesting. I'm like, yeah, you basically effed yourself by by having no real like other side plan for if Cameron was going to go haywire, because you just trusted that this Terminator was going to consistently work. So Cameron eventually makes her way to this church to all of a sudden find this little spot of water that Cameron is to dip her hand into, weirdly. And so all of a sudden, an alarm clock is to come on in this water, and that electrifies Cameron and drops her because she's now electrified. I'm like, what if Cameron would have never stuck her hand into that water? Like, the story really just is conveniently saying like Cameron is going to force her hand into this water to electrify herself. It has to go that way. So they try because they only have X amount of seconds, like a minute and a half or something. And so Cameron is to try to unhook the back of Cameron's brain by cutting into it and trying to eventually like unhook uh, Cameron's like CPU or kind of her brain, unhooking it. And eventually they don't have enough time, and plus also like the knives and the screwdrivers and the stuff that they're using isn't going to work all that well. So they're trying their best, but eventually Cameron gets back up, and so they end up running off. And so it seems that eventually, while they're to be running off, eventually Sarah is to fall, and so Sarah is telling John just to continue to run. So of course he does. Eventually, Cameron is to find Sarah and is to step on her, and we have Cameron who's to tell Sarah, it's like call for John, call out for John, scream for John. So Sarah is just screaming because she's in pain because stepping on her, and John just continues to run and doesn't look back. John goes off to uh, eventually go to this place where it seems like there is a bunch of trucks, vehicles, so on and so forth. Cameron follows behind because she realizes that it's a moot point to try, or it's a waste of time to just press on to Sarah when John is not coming back. So, and Sarah will even have told Cameron that John's not coming back. He knows better. So, plus Sarah has been told already that at some point she evidently is going to get cancer and die. And supposedly in episode 2 we end up talking about that a little bit more and dissecting that a little bit more. So, but anyways, let's pull back a little. So John is to go into one of these trucks and eventually see if he can get one of the trucks started, so eventually he can get the heck out of here. And so he's trying to hotwire this truck, and it seems that he can eventually get it working. But then eventually Cameron ends up seeing or like hearing the sound of John's truck and immediately walks right in front of it to have Sarah Connor go and drive this other truck right into squeezing like Cameron between these two trucks. So now John can take the time to take this CPU out and be able to maybe possibly fix it, um, but reasonably, they're just going to go and possibly burn this Terminator instead of actually fixing her or figuring out how to fix her. So let's go into the other side story things that we also have here. So James Ellerson is to eventually be face to face with a Terminator who is Cromarty, who's to be holding a gun with some with his metal kind of face kind of disheveled. And so it seems like this guy was not an actual threat to this Terminator, so he walked off. Walking off to have Dixon, who is the ambulance driver from season 1, like seeing this Terminator walk off, and he's just kind of like he's kind of hiding out. So Dixon makes it back where Ellison is to see all these FBI guys who are dead, And so Dixon just drops this walkie because he's like, oh my god, like the carnage here is just crazy. So in this first episode, Ellison is to quickly file this whole report saying that the human um, Cromartie is to be the guy who did this whole thing, and then he ended up getting killed afterwards. So eventually, his seemingly superior Federici, weird pronouncing. So a guy named Sack, who is to seemingly had Ellison's filed report, is to eventually ask Ellison if all the stuff that he had said in his report is to be the truth and everything like that, because perjury is technically a crime, because this is a court for whatever reason. And Ellison is to just say, yeah, everything that I said is 100% factual. And Sack continues to ask Ellison questions, and Ellison doesn't really have any answers. He's just like, yeah, this guy did it. Like, whatever. Like, there isn't much that I could say about this. And because Ellison doesn't give any answers really to this besides real true speculation. And if I think of anything, Ellison could have just said, it's like, well, like, I don't know how he could have done any number of these things if I were to really say anything here, or just be speculation. I don't know factual things. So we have that going on, and so we also have Catherine Weaver and uh, and Derek Reeves going and trying to get uh, that that computer piece that was to be the guy from the last season who was to figure out some computer that can beat anybody in the world at chess. And so Derek Reeves ends up getting a piece of that computer, and Dixon ends up going into his ambulance, finding Derek Reeves there, and finding out that he took one of the computer pieces. I'm not sure which one is more valuable, even though either the one that Derek Reeves has, or either the one that Walsh has, where Walsh ends up giving this computer thing to um, Catherine Weaver, and so Weaver ends up having this stretch of dialogue where she is to mention how when she kind of looks above everybody and sees them kind of crossing the street and seeing how it seems that everybody is to seemingly have a forced way of doing things. But she's realizing it's like, well, but really looking at a human, like you would start to see certain things where maybe someone would just try to run across the road anyways. You would start to see uh, certain people just kind of doing whatever they want, and where if you're to see a Terminator, like a Terminator does exactly what it's supposed to do. It's of course rules are to be something that it follows. So to really have us find out that Catherine Weaver at the end of this episode, because Catherine Weaver is to go and come to certain people in her company and say, well, I'm going to take this project and kind of change it and kind of mold it and shift it. And so we have one guy who is to kind of be frustrated about that, to the point of him just getting ticked about this girl wanting to wanting to change his project. And so he ends up going to the bathroom, and he ends up talking about that to some coworker. And so all of a sudden, without this guy knowing it, Catherine Weaver had overheard this whole conversation, because she is a metaled, she's a liquid metal Terminator, and she evidently was to be in the form of some urinal, and so she changes back into the form of a normal human, and then she goes and takes her finger and like freaking like long stretches her finger into this metal piece and stabs him into the head and kills him off. Which I thought was so like, wouldn't that be a one interesting thing for a Terminator thing to eventually have like a Terminator just appear out of nowhere in any situation? Man, would that be a really cool thing to eventually have, like put us like on at real unease in the Terminator thing, where you would have like a liquid metal Terminator just turning into anything. Like in Terminator 2 Judgment Day, John Connor was to mention, it's like, well, why doesn't it turn into a bomb or a vase or something to get me? And the Terminator is like, well, it can't. It has to turn into something of equal size. I'm like, wait a minute. Like, we just had this girl, like, go from a urinal to now being, like, back into human? I'm like, wait a minute. This doesn't quite make sense. But also, when you look at it, though, in Terminator 2 Judgment Day, uh, like the one liquid Terminator like was on the floor and then eventually just kind of came up from the floor weirdly and then killed the guy by the vending machine who was getting the coffee. Uh, so yeah, like I guess like I don't know what kind of rules are with the whole liquid Terminator of things, but I don't know. It's funny. So going back into, because I think I covered most of this episode for all the side stories. So luckily I covered all that. So back to the main one. So the guys are going to take Cameron's body and burn her in some junkyard, and when John was going and trying to pull uh, Cameron's CPU, her thing in the back of her head, she was to plead to John to not do this. Like, she ran a test, she was fine, and she started spouting out all these words that he loved her, or she loved him, and he loves her, and so on and so forth. She just goes on and on and on and on. And then eventually, John just goes and disconnects Cameron. And so while they're almost going to torch her, John asks for the flare, and John decides at the last minute to just put her CPU back in and just see if like if she is not going to hurt him. So John goes and points a gun at her and asks her, it's like, well, you're not going to hurt me, right? And then John just gives the gun to Cameron, and Cameron is like, no, I'm not going to hurt you. Because in her head, it said terminate, but then it said terminate override. Because evidently Cameron has the control now of kind of what's going on, that she can override things, but it still feels like Cameron has like a screw loose, so to speak. It seems like there is a bit of delay, or it seems that there is to just be some kind of uh, like kind of slower process to this Terminator. So eventually that kind of plays into the second episode. So, and like I said, at the end of this episode, we have John who gets a new haircut. And so, in the next episode, because at the end of this, Sarah is just to talk to uh, John and just kind of mention that there's sometimes that they just like really need to do certain things, that it might be for the best um, to do certain things. Cameron's also telling Sarah if something is to ever go wrong with Cameron again, to never try to turn her back on if they could turn her off. So, in the second episode, really, it's to kind of be focused on John going back to school, meeting a girl named Riley who is to ask John, "Hey, do you got $20?" And John is like, "Why?" And the Riley's like, "'Cause I'm hungry." It's like, okay. So it seems John in this episode meets this girl named Riley and brings her home, spends the night with her, and Riley's like, well, hey, we should probably go to school. And John's like, nah, like maybe we'll go to school tomorrow. Seems like Connor really doesn't give about school, and so maybe he's just kind of pulling Riley down. We'll kind of see how the John Connor, uh, we'll just see how John and Riley play out here. So Riley is to be with John at home, and Sarah is to immediately tell John, it's like, well, hey, why do you have this girl here? Like, no, like you shouldn't have someone here. And John's like, so are you telling me that I shouldn't live my life? That I like, when am I ever going to live my life? And so John just goes off and just is to have fun with Riley just being in his room. Like there's nothing that leads to seemingly a romantic relationship. John eventually has Riley, like they exchange phone numbers, and so John is to say, it's like, well, hey, if you call me, you got to tell me the date and the month. So Riley calls him, tells him the date and the month, and so John is like, hey, you got it right. Like weirdly, here's the goofy thing. It's technically November now, and hilariously enough, Riley is to say that it's November. It's early November, but still, it's like still November. So I just thought that was so weird that I decided to like start this show on like in the second episode is to say that it's November. Weirdly, I just thought that was so strange. I was like, man, I guess I pick things at the right times, or weirdly, goofily, right? So, so yeah, so the second episode, so I want to try to get things, because I know there's certain, oops, because I know there's certain characters in the second episode that aren't in the first one, so let's get that right. So Sarah is to have Cameron just stay at home, and like there's probably not any records of Cameron, so no one's gonna like say like, hey, what is this young girl not going to school? And because I guess maybe Cameron looks old enough for whatever reason. Uh, so in this episode, there's to be a guy coming from the future called Wells, and he makes it to uh, Sarah Connor's place and is to tell Sarah and Derek to go and find a guy named Greenway in 2 days from now and try to get to this power plant. And so Sarah's like, okay, why are we doing this? And so Derek is to mention that the power plant that it seems that this Wells guy was talking about before he dies, Derek said that this power plant was to be their main hideout when they got to the future. So Sarah and Cameron decide to go and get jobs and be temps at this power plant. So we immediately uh, have Lillian, who is to just kind of usher these guys in and kind of tell them what to do, so on and so forth. So uh, Greenway is to seemingly want to blow the whistle on a number of things about this power plant to keep it the safest power plant that they can kind of put together here. It seems that Greenway is to consistently be stalling or trying to avoid certain things that this power plant is doing again to keep everyone safe. Nelson is of course kind of the villain of this episode. Uh, to just be a person who is to uh, kind of see Sarah Connor and is to just kind of be suspicious about her at some points. So, uh, so eventually, what happens is Sarah is to just kind of be a little bit nosy, is trying to follow Greenway, and then Sarah is to go to this bar that coincidentally Greenway is to be at. And so Sarah and Greenway spark up this conversation, and we come to find out that actually Greenway is to supposedly have cancer because I guess of his time at being at this power plant. So it's like, oh, that's too bad, but he's probably gonna die and become a Terminator anyways, technically. So Nelson is also to be at this bar and spot that Sarah is spending some time with Greenway. So, because in Greenway is to say that he is to be kind of a loner because no one wants to hang out with him because not only is he just like he has cancer, but not only that, but it just seems uh, like he's to be kind of a thorn in anyone's side that he's to kind of work with because he consistently blows the whistle on a number of things. So, uh, so the very next day, so Sarah is eventually kind of sweeping up, and so Nelson is to tell Sarah about uh, this one thing that she needs to go and clean, and so she needs to go and get a hazmat suit to go and clean into this certain area. So Sarah goes in there, and then like Sarah just kind of feels so weird about this that she ends up like rushing out. She ends up rushing out to find out that supposedly she is to be taking away at this Geiger counter that I guess she is irradiated, and so they end up like tearing her hazmat suit off and like just spraying her down like without her having any clothes on. And so all of a sudden Sarah ends up getting like kind of temporary clothes, and then so Nelson ends up giving her back her own clothes back to her. And so Sarah's like, why are you giving my own clothes back to me? Like these clothes are probably irradiated. And Nelson is like, oh, no, 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 no. Like, if anything, we found out that you weren't irradiated at all. Like, it seems like like these devices seem to have a mind of their own. I'm like, what the is that? Like, I'm sorry, I would go and I'd be suing the F out of these people just force them to now have accurate counters because it's like, I'm sorry, what if this moment like Sarah was to think that she was to die and she called 18 different people, like, to just say, like, yeah, I'm dying, I'm radiated, hoo hoo hoo. And then all of a sudden, like, maybe she told her like husband, like, I'm divorcing you, I'm leaving you, bye, because I'm irradiated. Like, they could have done any number of things in this one short of time. So Greenway is to come back, and Greenway is to come back different. Uh, and so different meaning that Greenway just turns out to be a Terminator. We also, in the last episode, had Ellison uh, go and talk to Cromartie, and it seems that Cromartie is thinking that Ellison is going to lead him back to Sarah, because Ellison is eventually going to figure out connections to certain characters that is to lead back to Sarah. Because in this second episode, Ellison is to make it to Dixon and his wife, and to kind of tell them that maybe they should leave to go on vacation, just kind of head out to a safer place, because this place doesn't seem all that safe right now. So, uh, and plus, it seems that Dixon is now holding a gun, and Dixon's wife is just like, I've never seen him hold a gun before or have a gun. So, we also have in this episode where both Sarah and John are getting this new home from this Casey Corbin, who is to be pregnant right now. So we'll kind of see how that develops for this story. And so the girls mention that she's a whale because she's pregnant. It's like, come on, like, it's not that bad. So, uh, but yeah, so Greenway comes back to the power plant, and of course, he is a Terminator. So now both Sarah and uh, Cameron have to figure out a way to take this character down. So, or Cameron. So Sarah is telling Cameron, like, hey, like, this guy's a Terminator. We need to do something. And Cameron is just kind of still mopping the floor, and Sarah's like, what are you doing? And Cameron's like, I'm thinking, like, I need to figure out how to take this character down. So we get where eventually Cameron is going to fight Greenway, and Sarah starts shooting Greenway, and he just kind of gets some bullets into his chest, like about roughly 4. And so Cameron figures out how to put Cameron figures out how to take out Greenway by shoving him into this one electrical part of this power plant, where it ends up killing Greenway off. And so they're like, okay, so we figured something out. So as Cameron is to walk off, Sarah is to ask if Cameron is okay, and she doesn't answer. So Sarah asks again, and Cameron is to say, I'm fine. So eventually, when Sarah and Cameron are to come home, Sarah is to find, of course, Riley in their home. And that's when, like, Sarah kind of confronts John about, like, hey, you have a woman here? And John's like, yeah, I'm trying to live my life. I'm trying to live my life, Sarah. Let me live my life. And so Riley is to build this weird robot to protect John, I guess, when he's sleeping. And John's like, oh, great, thanks. All I need is another robot in my life. Thanks. Thanks. So, so yeah. So I think that covers a bulk of episode 2. Not much on the Weaver side of things, uh, but nonetheless, like I think that's all that really plays out in the second episode. If there was something I probably missed, because that's bound to happen, because I think there might have been a Catherine Weaver thing here, but not quite sure what exactly that was in this episode, in this second episode. Because I think she's probably just like handling her business. Uh, but like, oh, I think Catherine Weaver at the end of this was to come in after this whole power plant situation was kind of a malfunctioning thing. And so Catherine Weaver comes in as this kind of business guy, I guess, to buy out this power plant, to mention that they're going to put certain things within this power plant to help it run more efficiently. And eventually she ends up walking off, and I'm like, oh, okay, so more than likely, probably in the future, uh, either way, we're probably not going to be able to have the resistance being able to use this power plant as their hideout. More than likely, they might have to have some alternative hideout in the future, but eventually, maybe we'll see how this plays out in other episodes. But with that said, I think I've covered most of this. I feel good about calling this one. Um, yeah, so like it's kind of just getting a refresher about these characters, and just kind of seeing how the whole like Terminator things like plays out in this season. I think from what I had heard, this season kind of leaves off as this like cliffhanger like thing, hoping that eventually they would go and come back to it. But I really think that a lot of these people that were to have been involved in the show probably would not come back. Like, I think a lot of people got really busy after this show, or just went on to do bigger and better things. Uh, like, when really looking at it, the girl that plays Sarah Connor went off to, like, do, like, Game of Thrones and all number of things. It seems like she's always really busy. And Summer Glau, I think that's her name. Uh, like I think she's always busy too. She has some kind of she always has some kind of show that eventually she lands herself on, or something else. As far as the guy who plays John Connor, I've seen him in maybe like one other movie besides this. Um, but anyways, so I think I'm gonna get out of here. Maybe at one point there might be eventually some kind of like timeline movie that they could probably have with Terminator, where they might bring any number of things back at some point, where even where there's a timeline where John Connor might be erased, they can probably go into alternate timelines or something like that, where eventually uh, we might bring back characters from any number of universes, or whichever, to just kind of have these moments here in a new Terminator movie. But there's any number of things eventually they can go and do, and that might be fun, especially if James Cameron is game to continue putting out some kind of Terminator thing. Because it seems that him and another person are to own the rights for Terminator, and basically Terminator is now back into James Cameron's kind of uh, like kind of ownership, and so now nobody really wants to really go and do anything tied with Terminator, because James Cameron now owns it, and no one would probably want to pay a huge chunk of change to get that kind of like, hey, let's go and play around with Terminator. That would cost a lot of money. because two people are to technically own the rights for Terminator. Unless it's like Disney, like I could possibly see Disney just buying up, like from James Cameron, like Terminator rights, so that way they can use it however the heck. That would actually be cool. I could see Disney doing like throwing their weight around to just get that, because yeah, that would definitely be a smart, intelligent buy or purchase or whatever. Um, so yeah, let's hope for that in the future, so that way you can keep Terminator alive, or otherwise it's dead, unless James wants to. Kind of play around with this whole Terminator thing himself, put together his kind of whatever universe of movies or whatever he wants to do, because that's the guy that has the most control of it right there. So I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody. I hope I covered most of this episode, but I feel good about it. I feel like I covered most of this, so I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye. Oh, I'm gonna try to cover the rest of season two. We'll see how this video goes. If no one cares about it, then it'll be what it ends up being. If people view this, I'll just keep continuing on doing 2 episodes at a time. Maybe possibly let's see how every other day works. If people are to want to hear season two reviews, then I'll do those. But I'm gonna go. Bye, everybody. Bye.